Hey folks, welcome to Canadian Cutting Edge, and today we've got a knife from TwoSun. This is the TS259. It's a Wong design, and it's an odd knife in a couple ways. It's really quite odd, with two thumb studs. Yeah, only comes in this orange. 50 bucks at White Mountain Knives, but you save 10% with coupon code CCE, so that makes it about 45 bucks. And it's not a big knife. It's just barely under 3 inches from the tip to the closest spot on the handle. It's over 3 inches if the people where you jurisdiction where you are, if the authorities measure from the tip to the spine of the handle where it starts, that's over 3 inches. So, but from the closest spot to the tip, it's under 3 inches. You decide what's going to work in your jurisdiction. I want to tell you about this knife. Is it good? Is it not good? Is it okay? It certainly has pros, and it has a few cons as well. Come on to the tabletop. Let's check it out together. All right, let's take a look at this thing. Yes, it only comes in this orange, and you know, I might get it dyed, maybe a red, but it only comes in this orange. We've got a clip point blade, and the clip starts way back here. And then we've got a nice belly here, a little bit of a straight section. High flat grind. It's, you know, full flat on most of the knife, but not quite up to the spine up here. And then we got those two really funky, odd pocket clips, thumb studs, pocket clips. If you started watching my channel way back in 2016 when I started, I was constantly calling these pocket clips, and I just don't know why that clicks in my brain the way it does. That's how the words come out sometimes. Thumb studs. Why did Wong put two thumb studs on here? I do not know. I don't get it. But the general overall knife, I thought it looked kind of cool, so I decided to buy it. And they're not terrible. If we close it up, there's the thumb studs there. It's easy to get behind there. Flip that knife open. So not a problem. So it's okay. I guarantee you it'd be better with just one. I didn't take either of them off yet. Well, I'll talk about that in a second. Well, I'll just do it right now. This one came off. It just fell off and clanged on the floor. And thankfully I saw it right away. It just sticks out barely right there. Just barely any threads are sticking out right there. So it's not, you know, very well made. Like, that should have been a longer threaded thumb stud in there. I put it on there. It doesn't even take a full turn to tighten down. So I guess this one's the same way, but this one here has not come loose yet. The way it's made, it looks like these ones are supposed to come off. There's a little notch on the side of either one of those. There's a tool that they have to be able to put these on, but that's not well done. These thumb studs are really designed for a thinner blade. This is a fairly thick blade, over 1/8 of an inch. I'll give you all the exact specs later on, but these thumb studs are just weird. Are they a major turnoff? No, not really. You can always just use a flipper. When you're cutting through stuff, yeah, the back one is nice and clear. This one could get in the way of some stuff. I didn't find it to be a problem when I was cutting and slicing through things. You could get quite a distance this way. You know, if it's a more narrow knife, that could be more of a problem, but I didn't find it to be a problem. The edge of this blade, it's very thin. And like I said, I'll give you the exact measurements later on, but the grind angles are also very shallow. So from the factory, this thing sliced just beautifully, even though, you know, the edge sharpness wasn't super sharp, but it sliced and cut quite well. What don't I like about this blade? Well, the next biggest thing after the two thumb studs is the badging. You got Wong design, TS259, and 14C28N right on the main face of the bevel, right in the middle of it. I just don't like that. I wish I'd like all that information to be on the blade, but I'd like it up here on the ricasso, out of the way, not on the main bevel. And on this side, they plugged TwoSun right in the same spot. I think companies should be proud of their brand name, but it already says TwoSun on the thumb stud, on the pivot. Boy, my words are just going crazy today. So it says right there, it's TwoSun knives made in Yanling, or how, I'm not sure, that city in China, and it says it again on this side. So we don't need TwoSun 3 times on the knife, that's for certain. Anyhow, that brings us down to this part of the blade here. We've got a sharpness choil. It's not quite big enough. If not bigger, just moved this way a little bit. The flipper, we've got jimping up the front of it. It's very easy to get your finger right behind that flipper and deploy that blade. The detent's quite good, and happy with that. If you want to see the detent, let's close this thing. You can just see it get sucked in there and hear it. So that's quite good. We've got jimping on the thumb rest there, and it goes up. So very comfortable to get your thumb in there and hold that on there. And that's pretty much the blade. The handle, well, we've got, that little bit of a thumb rest area, a little dip here, and then it comes rounded back. Fits in the hand very, very well. So you can get a decent grip out of it if your hands aren't too big. Now my hands are just barely into the extra large range, just barely. And this is, I can't get a 4-finger grip in here unless I just use, the ends of my finger, but not if I, hold it the way I should. It's not a very big handle. We've got about a 3-inch grip in here, not an awful lot. I like the backspacer, although it's got a ripple in it, kind of like maybe they milled it too quickly and it's got sort of that bumpy machining ripple. But the lanyard hole, so the liner's cut away and the handle scale's cut away, the lanyard hole's back here. So even if you've got a lanyard, it's not bunching up and getting in the way. I like it when lanyard holes are done that way off the backspacer. Happy with that. We've got flat T8 screws, good stainless steel screws. Very happy with that. There's holes here. The pocket clip goes right or left. Now this is TwoSun's standard budget pocket clip these days. It's a little bit too big for this knife. Look at the size of that pocket clip. It just is too big for this knife. I really wish TwoSun would come out with a second budget pocket clip for their smaller knives. It's a little bit huge. We've got T8 button screws there. We've got a T8 screw here on the pivot pin, so everything's T8, that's a good thing. The pivot action and everything, I already talked about the detent, and opening up goes pretty smooth with the ceramic ball bearings. Lockup is very nice. It's fully engaged. There's lots of room for it to wear over. Nice cutaway here to get at that lock release, and it's got a nice chamfer on the side of it, so I'm happy with that. So, yep, works good. No blade play side to side until this comes loose, and this screw does come loose during use. That's a pretty perennial issue with TwoSun knives. The screws just come loose on the pivot. I like to use VC3 Threadmate, Vibratite Threadmate, and a whole lot more than Loctite. It's a much better product. It's a messier product until you get used to it, but it's a much better product. We got a little bit of skeletonizing in there, but the lockup, the blade alignment, pretty much right down the middle, and I already talked about the lockup being quite nice. Balance point on this thing is right over that spot between the first finger choil and your others. I wish it was more up here. And this handle, it's a little bit, for its size, for its length and everything, it's just a little bit thick. I guess they could have used slightly thinner liners maybe, but just slightly thinner G10 would be a little more comfortable in the hand for this size of a knife. How well does it cut? It cuts quite well. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. It cuts and slices and pierces quite well. We've got thinness starting way up here, so it's tapering down to that point, and it punctures well, and it cuts well, and it slices well. So let's take this thing apart and show you how it's built. Here we've got it taken apart, and as usual, there's a D-shaped hole right there, D-shaped pin, so that's fine, no free spinning. We've got the nylon caged ceramic ball bearings, which is okay. There's, 8 ball bearings. It's not super high-end at all, but there you go, 8 ball bearings per side. The backspacer is on pins. These pins do not have shoulders, which means you can't use it without this. A little bit of skeletonizing on both sides, ceramic detent ball. The screws here These are good quality screws. There's no Loctite on them, which is why they come loose easily. And as usual on TwoSun knives, there's a detent ramp right there for when you close the knife. It's just a nice little touch that they put on it, even though it's not a high-end knife. And so that's pretty much how the construction goes. It's time now to go over all the measurements and everything. The weight of this knife, 122 grams, 4.3 ounces. Sharpness from the factory, I got a score of 195 best. That's testing it 3 times on 3 spots and getting the average score. 195 is a little bit worse than average, but nothing significant at all. The cutting edge length, so from the heel of the blade to the tip, 76 millimeters, 2.99 inches. Tip of the blade to the closest spot on the handle, 75.4 millimeters, 2.97 inches. The blade thickness, 3.64 millimeters, 0.143 of an inch, so yeah, well over 1/8 of an inch, because that's 0.125. The blade depth, the widest point is right here, where this thumb riser ends and the clip starts. 31.1 millimeters, 1.22 inches. How thick is it behind the grind? Measured again in 3 places. The average score is 0.3 millimeters, 12/1000ths of an inch. That's how thin that is. You can sharpen this loads of times before it's going to get thick behind the grind. The grind angles. Well, this side's got an average score of 12.6 degrees. This side's got an average score of 15.0 degrees. This side started at 14.4, ended at 15.6 degrees. That's 1.2 degrees of change. This side started at the heel at 11.5 degrees, ended at 13.7 degrees, 2.5 degrees of change. So the average being 12.6. That is too shallow. Even 15 degrees, I think, would be too shallow for this. I'd probably sharpen it to around 17, 18 degrees per side, depending on what I was doing with it. The handle now, the handle length, 104.5 millimeters, 4.11 inches. The grip area, and I'm not counting this back part here, just up to that point where my thumbnail is. It's about 8 centimeters or 3 inches. That's rounded just slightly. The thickness of the handle scales on the G10, 14 millimeters, 0.551 of an inch. I'd like it to be just at half or under of an inch. The handle depth, the widest point's right there, 27.3 millimeters, 1.07 inches. When the knife is closed, the widest point is right up here by the flipper, 35.5 millimeters, 1.4 inches. And with the blade deployed, full length, 180 millimeters, 7.09 inches. So 3 and 4, those are pretty good, ratios. It's an okay knife as far as the specs go. What's the summary of this thing? Well, I don't like these thumb studs. They come off too easily. There's not enough threads on them. I wish there was more so they'd be on there. And I wish there was only this thumb stud and not that one. The thumb stud would be back far enough out of the way. It still would work just fine. I'm just pushing on that thumb stud and it deploys just fine. 2 thumb studs, I don't know. I think somebody was just trying to make something interesting for the sake of making something interesting and not for the sake of making something good. And I don't know how this got passed and got accepted by TwoSun with these 2 thumb studs. You could take one of them off. You just need, some pliers. If you don't mind wrecking them, you can just grab it and turn it off with pliers and then just leave this last one. Of course, there's going to be a hole there. That might look a little bit odd. I guess that's what you got. I don't like the big badging. I don't like 2 thumb studs. It's a little bit too small for extra large hands. And like I said, mine's barely extra large. And it's a little bit too thick at the same time. It's kind of odd combination. Pocket clip, just too big for this knife. The pivot screw, that's a perennial issue with TwoSun knives that coming loose. You can deal with that. Sharpener's choil is a little bit too small. I've got a whole video that I did years ago about making sharpener's choils. It could be made a little bit bigger if you need to. Things that I really like. It's just under 3 inches, so there's loads of people that live under 3-inch laws that could have this. Nice and thin behind the grind. Yeah, the sharpening, not that great, but you can sharpen this. You've got good access to the lock release. I'm happy with that. The detent's quite good. Blade alignment's very good. Action's good. You know, a lot of that stuff is just quite nice. The jimping up here is quite good. And it's a useful knife to have. So that's my review. What do you think of it? Do you have one of these? I'd like to give a shout out to my financial supporters. You guys are awesome. I appreciate it. Thanks for liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. And remember, friends, always cut towards your chum, not your thumb.